On this video, I'm going to show you what Murray Spivack taught me at my first lesson. And what he teaches at a first lesson may be different if you're a child or a beginner when you go to him, because I was already a drummer with 12 years experience when I went to him. So he covered a lot of information pretty quickly with me because I understood what he was talking about. Whereas if you're just a very beginner on the very basics, this may be more information than you need. So as I make this video, I will try to make it clear to you what a beginner should do, and the rest of the information is to broaden the horizons of the rest of you drummers that have been playing for a while. So, the first thing Murray discussed with me, and with most students, is how he holds the stick, where he places the fulcrum or pivoting point for the stick in the hand, and how the stick is an extension of your forearm. Okay, so he covers all this in about half a minute and a half. But he does that because myself, I was a drummer with 12 years experience, so he could move fast through a lot of information that I already knew about drumming. But he went quick over the grip, and here it is. I'm going to show you what he's talking about. Now, people online, there's a lot of videos about the Murray Spivack grip, and I'm going to try to explain to you here what is the primary difference between Murray and everybody else. If you look in drum books or you watch videos online, you will notice everybody says the fulcrum is here between the thumb and first finger. And drummers have been using this, since marching days, 1800s. So it works. You can play drums this way. If you practice it and hold it and do it, you can find a way to make it work. But Murray and Richard Wilson had a more sophisticated method, and they placed the fulcrum in the middle finger, not the first two. The idea is that you get the middle finger under the stick to support it, and that's where the stick's going to rock. It's the first crack of your middle finger. It's a straight line. The crack's a straight line. The stick sits in that straight line. He would describe that as the fulcrum, okay, the pivoting point. And then he would use the first two fingers. He called them guides. Now, a little detail that Richard showed me that Murray never really mentioned was that the first finger and thumb, if you notice, the tip of the thumb and the side of my index finger are equal to each other. The thumb's not further up. The first finger isn't letting go and pointing. I'm using those two fingers in an equal way to hold the stick, and I'm letting the weight sit in the fulcrum. Now, Murray called this a three-fingered grip, the fulcrum and the guides, and he asked you to keep those fingers in close next to the stick. Now, it's not that you play all the time with just three fingers, but the middle finger, where the fulcrum is the guiding point, and these fingers will assist that middle finger by your sense of touch. And what I mean by that is, as you play faster and the stick is rocking there, if you're getting louder and moving with more force, you will discover, oh yeah, I need a little assistance with the other fingers to keep things where they need to be. So it's not a three-fingered grip necessarily, but that's how you start to learn it. You just deliberately keep these fingers off the stick, curled next to the others, and develop that fulcrum. And that was Murray's whole process. He takes you through a 1-year lesson program, and he has all the rudiments arranged in a certain order. And that order is, you develops this fulcrum using the simplest motions on up to the most, I won't want to say complex, but the rudiments and the motions. As you get to the more difficult rudiments, the motions that I'm going to show you are either overlapping with each other, or something's going on in one hand where something else is going on in the other hand. And so you start with the simple basic motions, and as you get control of them, as you go through the rudiments, when you get to the more difficult rudiments, you suddenly discover, gee, they're not difficult because I feel these motions, and you're just juggling these motions around in different combinations to execute what you want to play. That was part of Murray's genius, is the order that he teaches the rudiments and how the motions I'm going to show you next all go forward. So once you have the grip, let me show you one more important thing about the grip, is that on the fleshy part of your hand, at the back of the hand, if you press here, you can feel a little bone, okay? It's right there at the back of your hand. He wants the butt end of the stick to be on the outside of that bone, not in the middle of the hand, not on that side of the bone, but on the outside of the bone, okay? And there's one other little thing that happens when you put it there. I will show that to you now. I got to move back because I'm going to show you the way Richard Wilson taught me to teach it to beginners. So if you're a beginner, this is the way to find this. And if you've already been playing a while, you may already do this or you may not. Okay? I'm going to have a look. If you just hold the sticks the way I just described, with the butt end on the outside of that bone, you will notice that when you just relax and let your arms hang down, that the sticks are at a different angle than your arm. Notice, the bones of my forearm and the wrist are pointing straight down at the floor. But the stick is going, you know, over there. So there's a difference in the angle. And what Richard was saying, well, shake your arms out, let everything hang at your side, and then turn your wrist out a little bit. And you notice when you do that, I will point at the drum. Notice how the stick is in line with the arm now. Why is that important? Well, there's two factors here. One is it helps the stick line up with that crack in your middle finger. So the crack is straight. You can get the stick to lay in the crack, because when it's over here, it's a little bit of an angle. And this changes where that weight sits in your hand. The other factor that's important is something I'm going to show you after a couple more steps in this video, which is something Murray called the downstroke. In the downstroke, you're using your wrist to move the forearm and arm, and then tossing the stick back down into the drum. And when you move everything in a straight line, it makes all this weight transfer very efficiently. And when it's over here, it's a little different how the weight transfers, and you tend to come down and hit the drum with a little curve or a little scoop, sort of like when you're got the stick like this. It's very tiny, but it does make a difference, and you can feel it when you can control these two different positions and mess around with how it feels as you play. You'll notice that, oh yeah, that straight line makes it easier and faster, and this sort of gives a little scuff across the drum head. The sound is slightly different, and you can hear it once you train your ear and you know what you're listening for. Okay, the next step is turning the wrist and playing single strokes, and that's what we're going to go on to. Okay, the next thing we're going to go on to was single strokes and turning the wrist. So once you have this concept of the stick as an extension of your arm and you feel the grip a little bit, you're going to want to go on. Now, the first thing Murray would talk about is the floor. And this is just where your arms are relaxed at your side and the sticks are 1 inch above the drum. Now, you start out with the stick at 1 inch above the drum and you go through Murray's program. After you get through it, you'll realize, well, there's some things you may want to have the floor lower. There's sometimes you may want that floor to be higher. It depends what you're doing. But the concept of the floor and the weight returning to it is what you want to kind of get onto first. Now, a floor, it's called a floor for a reason, because it's a resting point. Just like the floor is a resting point for you and your body and your mass on the planet. Okay, so everything on Earth, and this is the other thing Murray says to you, is you must move up to come down. To is an important part of that statement. Up to come down. Not up and down or up to go down. It's up to come down. And what that means is it's the same as what you do when you walk and run. And if you stop it for a moment and think about how you walk and run, when you move your foot, you lift it up, and then when it gets to the height or distance of your step, you relax. And gravity pulls it down at exactly the same speed you moved it up. So, that is a law of motion that is enforced by gravity. Here on Earth, you can only go as fast as you can go up. When you run, you are pushing your body up and forward, and as fast as you can do that, your body and foot comes down to the earth. So, running in that way is what develops all those muscles. They get stronger because you're lifting your body weight up against gravity. And if you want to get your wrists faster, you need to lift the stick. It's a little weight, and you're repeatedly lifting it over and over, and over the period of a few years, your wrist will get limber and stronger and move faster. Just the same as if you go out and run and work on your running. But you must use gravity in the right way so the muscles are challenged to lift. Now that's the problem with this. You're already strong enough to hold a few grams of wood in the air. So how is throwing a stick down and letting the drum head throw it back going to challenge your muscles to grow? It's not the same. When you learn to lift with the wrist like this, you can feel the workout that occurs in your forearm as you practice. And over a few months, you will see and feel your wrists get faster. How fast can you get? Well, that's up to your nervous system. How fast is the electrical and mechanical motions in your body? How fast do you go? Are you a fast runner? Are you an average speed person? Your drumming will reflect that. But if you exercise the wrist, it will improve beyond where it is, because you're going to grow muscles by lifting. Lifting, just like a weightlifter. You will grow muscle over time. You can't do it fast. It takes time. You must practice repeatedly, just like any athlete. That's the mechanical, athletic part of drumming. Now, the next step in all this then is, once you get single strokes moving, now remember I mentioned I was already playing for 12 years when I got to Murray, so he didn't have to explain to me what eighth notes and 16th notes and, the mathematics of rhythm. If you don't know those things, then go to a teacher and learn them, because they're important. Okay, so something I learned from Richard when I asked him about these things, how's the best way to get a beginner to do this or do that, or how do you get to the roll? Here's the process for getting your double strokes going. So, to get to double strokes, Richard felt that a student first had to get that grip comfortable, understand how to lift and return to the floor, and build eighth notes. If you don't know what those are, it's 1 and 2 and 3 and 4, and in the metronome in your feet is on the number 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And now he felt a student in the beginning, since you're just learning this, well, you're not going to be very fast in the beginning with your wrists, so it takes a little while turning your wrists and building that speed up. But if you already have some speed from playing drums, then you just have to figure out how to turn like this. So the goal with single strokes then is to get to I'm guessing, but around 120 beats per minute. You want to put your metronome on 120. And it's good to put both your feet with the metronome as a drummer. Get your feet coordinated as you're going through all these rudiments of motion. Don't leave your feet out. Okay, but once you get to 120, what happens is students are increasing their speed, 60s, 70s, the 80s, the 90s, as they pass 100, somewhere around 108, 1012, every once, the student will do that and they'll accidentally get a bounce and they're not sure why, and they think they're making a mistake, and I'm going to take advantage of the mistake at that point and stop them. And at that point, you want to show the student, okay, see what happens with the wrist? I'm going to go sideways so you can see it. If you just move the wrist, and if your Richard would do it this way. He said, shake out your hand, relax everything, and then close the spaces gently between your fingers so they're touching. And then crank your wrist back. And you'll notice how, gee, those fingers all curled up. The thumb kind of just rode along at the side. Now, if you're doing this, that just means your fingers aren't relaxed. You got to relax the tendons of the fingers so that the wrist pulls all the ligaments and does that. Okay? So if you notice then, there's this thing that happens in anatomy. When you move your wrist, your fingers open and close. They open and close. They extend and come back. Now, if you hold the stick like we're talking about, well, you notice the wrist is flat. And the secret then in bouncing is to bend your wrist down a little bit and let those fingers, which are under the stick supporting it, they will move down like you just saw, all by themselves. I'm not doing finger control. I'm moving the wrist, and the wrist moves the fingers because it's all interconnected. Okay? It's not a finger isolated motion, it's a wrist motion. And all that happens is these knuckles go down lower than the wrist. So you're going down a little below where you established the floor. And when you do that, your hand opens up. Let me demonstrate. Eighth notes at 120. You can't even see me do it because at 120, I'm barely doing that. And the blur of the wrist, you can't see with, the cameras we have. This isn't a sport camera that goes at 1200 frames per minute, so you can see a guy, how he throws a baseball. I wish I could get somebody with a camera like that to film how you play the drums, but I don't have access to that. So I got this cheap little camera, and you can't really see my wrist bending. So what I'm going to do is turn sideways here to the camera and isolate one hand for you and show you. Maybe you can see it in the camera now. See how the wrist bent down? See how the stick moves? It moves over the fulcrum all by itself. And if you notice, the notes are equal. They sound the same. Now, why am I pointing that out? Because I've seen online a lot of guys with videos that say this is how you play a double stroke, because they're in this world, throwing the stick down. So they thrust the stick into the drum and then say, okay, when it flies up, you grab it with your fingers and pull it back. So they let go and then they grab, gung, 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 and they work this motion up really fast, grabbing, releasing, and it's all fingers and it's tight. And it's a lot of work to do to make two notes equal when all I have to do is let the stick sit there and move once, and I get two equal notes. So if you have a stable fulcrum, you can bounce on anything. The fulcrum is reacting with gravity. Gravity is constant. So the fulcrum works in this manner. You can bounce equal notes on anything. You don't need to throw the stick down and then grab it to force it back into the drum to make it equal, because if you do that, the first note's going to be loud, and of course then you would have to go and grab it and throw it back into the drum. That's just not an efficient way to play a roll or double strokes. And if you want to spend 3 or 4 years developing that to get it, and it'll sound pretty good, but it'll never sound as smooth as somebody that just moves once. Watch Buddy Rich. You won't see him going gank, 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 gank when he plays double strokes. It's up to you, Make your decision, practice one or the other, and go from there. But if you bend your wrist down a little bit, it doesn't take much at 120. Okay. Now, like I said before, I was already playing drums when I got to Murray. So he showed me all this pretty quick, and he immediately went on from the roll to the first sheet he hands out, and he put it up on the music center, and it said roll chart, and it had all the rudimental rolls laid out on it. Okay? just by numbers. He didn't show upstrokes like the example you can get at the end of this video. I've laid out where the upstrokes and motions are. But he just had the rudimental rolls on a chart there of rudiments. And what he explained to me, the way the process he wanted you to practice the rolls was, you get your metronome going with your right hand, since most people are right-handed, but you can also do this left-handed, and I would recommend you do that. But right-handed, he would start with those eighth notes and show you the bounce, and then he would say, okay, all the rolls have an accent on the end, and you need to make that accent with what he called a downstroke. So he would start with the traditional 7-stroke roll. And if you notice, I'm starting with the left hand. The metronome in time is in my feet with the metronome. So you're always alternating your hands to the time. But I didn't know how to do this yet. None of the students do, unless you've luckily just got onto it a little. You know, I was a rock drummer. I was bashing and hitting hard. That's how I made my living. So this was new information to me. Now, the main thing he would do with the roll chart at this point was explain how he wanted you to count the rolls and get your feet going, so you could go through all the rolls as part of your practice and also get used to making that throwing motion at the end of each roll. But since you're not fast enough yet, that's the next step. But first I want to explain what he explained about counting rolls and how the process was he wanted you to practice. So you got the time going. I'm leading with the right hand. I'm going to start with the shortest rudimental roll, the 5-stroke roll. I'm sure a lot of you already know it. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Why am I counting to 3? Because my hands move 3 times. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. It's 3 motions. All the rolls are based on how you turn the wrists, how many times you turn the wrist to get to the end where the accent is. So the shortest rudimental roll, again, is the 5, and it's a roll that alternates, if you notice. It goes one way, then the other way. Now, the next thing was a new revelation for me at the time was that I read in all the drum books and understood this to be what I thought was true. So I'm leading with the right. If I play a 7-stroke roll, well, that's 4 motions. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? Doesn't alternate. You end with the accent, and it starts over again here. But what Murray would show me was that when you make a downstroke, all you have to do is bend afterwards, and the stick will bounce. Huh. You can alternate a 7-stroke roll. All the rolls can alternate when you do this. But if you do this, well, the full stroke's the loud note at the end of the roll. How are you going to get the stick down there to start a roll again? Oh, you're going to yank it down and go gung gung. You've got all these extra motions you're doing. Murray simplifies everything with down and release, or down and up, which is what is occurring in the hand as you're playing the roll. One of those bounces after you play it is followed up with the motion of the wrist to create the accent. And that's what he wanted you to become aware of in each of the rolls, is where do you make the upstroke to prepare for the accent at the end. And if you count the rolls in this way, you will feel, oh yeah, when I get to number 5, that's where I got to go up to land on 7. You figure that out, the mechanics of the roll chart. Okay, once you get it going, the idea is to roll, go into a roll, practice your roll going that way for a while, reverse it, practice it the other way for a while, alternate it, and go back to a roll. and then pick another roll, rudimental roll. You can go up, you can go down through the math, you can jump around from one roll to the next. That's all up to you how you practice. Keep your mind entertained, do it different every day. Make sense? That's how double strokes and what he called the downstroke and upstroke. He would demonstrate it, but go right on to the flams and the single strokes with accents. And that's what we'll go on to next. The next step, I want to mention one little thing that I missed a little previously is about this downstroke motion. Is when you're opening the hand for the doubles, that moment of impact, when you arrive at the floor, there was a little tiny thing Murray wanted you to do and Richard wanted you to do, and they had a different way of describing it. Murray called it a squeeze, and Richard described it as a pull towards your palm. Okay, what do those things mean? Well, when you make the impact of the downstroke, you will feel your hand want to squeeze a little in response to that impact. And if you feel them, I'm exaggerating because when you do it, it's so tiny, it's a change of pressure, that squeeze. You can't see it, but you do it and feel it. And it happens as a follow through to the impact of the stick. So the stick is coming down, it hits that drum, and the moment it hits, you will feel it in your hand. It wants to come back at that recoil from the impact, and you squeeze. Or, as Richard called it, you pull up towards the palm. And I'm exaggerating so you can see the finger move, but I found that I think he was right, or I felt it better as a pull, a gentle pull in that fulcrum point in the middle finger. It's just a gentle little pull. Murray called it more of a squeeze, and a lot of the students I know that just studied with Murray describe it to me as between the thumb and first finger. They would squeeze right in there. I also noticed that a lot of Murray's students let their first finger rest on the stick, and they don't quite use it with pressure to equal their thumb. They both work. This one's a little looser feeling than holding on. And in the beginning, that looseness helps you get the throw. But once you get really fast and efficient with the throw, you'll discover you don't want to waste that little bit of time letting the stick wiggle over the fulcrum. If you just hold it all the way down to the floor, you get a little more force out of the stick, or horsepower for your motion. It's a tiny difference. I think Richard was more aware of it or more concerned with it as a teacher because he played, rock and funk and blues and jazz and Latin music. He played all the styles professionally, so he understood how hard and loud you had to play in the professional world, where you got to realize that Murray was a player back in the 1920s and 30s on Broadway. So, electric instruments weren't even invented when he was a player. So Murray, his technique works fine just for playing loud. You got to understand hundreds and thousands of rock drummers studied with Murray and use this. It's no limit to how loud you play. It's just that awareness of how loud you have to play on a gig. I don't think Murray quite had that like Richard did. So Richard understood that, you need to hold it a little differently, and that helps you play at those volume levels. Again, Murray was an orchestral drummer, so, his touch was more for that musical world, the way he played. Okay, so that pull or squeeze is a follow-through to the impact of a throw. The other thing that happens when you pull or squeeze, however you want to conceive of it, is you are now holding the kinetic energy of the stick, and you can release it and get lots of things. It's kinetic energy. I'm not doing anything besides bending and letting the finger open after I'm holding it as a follow-through. And it's not real tight. It's just this little squeeze. You'll have to play around with it. But But the main thing is it stops the tip. Okay, so experiment with the pressure of your hand. How much do you need to squeeze or pull to see that stick stop at the floor, and you feel it stop. It's in your hand. You'll feel the motion go bonk and stop. Okay, so that's part of the downstroke that I didn't mention previously. I wanted to make sure we went over. Now, so Murray had showed me the double strokes in the roll chart, but the problem was I didn't really have this motion yet. This is a new concept to me at this point. How do you toss and throw a stick? Because I was just using my arms and hitting hard, playing in rock and blues bands and stuff like that. So that's what I had just developed on my own to play loud over 12 years playing in bands and stuff. Okay, so I get to Murray and now it's time to learn technique. Okay, so on the sheets that he hands out, there's the rolls. And I want to go on to the next two sheets, the flams and the single strokes with accents. Now, the purpose of those two sheets, and he would immediately go to them after he showed you how he wanted to count the rolls, because he knows that you can't make these motions yet very fast, and it's going to be difficult for you to integrate the motion fast enough into the roll. So he isolates the up and down strokes and starts you off with the flam going one direction. And he talks about, okay, this is how you make an up and down stroke. The tip of the stick stays at the floor until you get as high as you want to go. When this all starts to fall, you just make a wrist turn. And that wrist turn directs the falling weight to the tip. I'm not hitting with force. I'm allowing weight and gravity to pull this down. And when I hit, there's a little pull towards the palm as a follow through to stop the stick's energy. So, practicing the flam one way will get your right hand used to lifting up and down like this and making this motion. And then you go to the left hand, you work on your left hand, and you start to figure out how to do it. Once you feel it, the next step was to alternate the flam. And then Murray would point out that, well, when you alternate the flam, now you're not just making a down stroke, you're making an up and down stroke. So when you play that little grace note, as soon as it taps, you keep moving up with your wrist. When you get a little faster than this, it just feels like one motion, zoop, boom. Okay, but in the beginning, you got to make sure you bend and let the finger release its energy. And Richard would describe this as make sure you land on the bottom of the bead, not the tip. And the danger here is students very often will lift up while it's bouncing and the second note will be on the tip. And that changes the sound. You don't get an equal bounce if you don't just let the stick move over the fulcrum before you lift it. Okay? So, now you got the up and down stroke introduced into this process. The hands going up and down. One little detail I want to talk about a flam too is that the timing of the grace note and the flam. What I'm feeling in my body as I play these things is as I raise this up, wherever I'm going, a little high, real high, whatever it is, when it gets as high as it's going and I relax and feel gravity returning me to the floor and I start to make that turn, as soon as it starts down here, I let this go down. And that creates a nice distance between the notes. And eliminates the danger of a flat flam. What a flat flam is if both sticks hit the head at the same moment, the stick, you'll feel it. It'll like it chokes and the sound will go, and you won't get much sound out of the drum. So you want that distance between the notes, and the feeling is they're both dropping at the same moment. But because this one's dropping from here and this one's down here, your grace note is always getting there first. Alternated flams. So that introduces you to the up and down, and before he goes into more flam rhythms, he points to the other sheet with the 16th notes and triplets on it with accents. Okay, and then he demonstrates the first 16th note exercise with an accent on the beginning of those 4 16th notes. And he shows you that, well, look, there's that up and down motion. The same thing you're doing in the flam, is what you do when you do 16th notes. So he wants you to see that fact that the motion is the same in two different rhythms and things that you play as a drummer. Well, that's one of the genius things of Murray, is that he unites all of the rudiments into motions. And he also teaches the rudiments in a specific order. And that order moves from simple to difficult, and from simple combinations of up and downs to the more complex combinations of up and down motions. But as you go through the rudiments, you come to this realization that, oh my God, they're all related by these motions, and if you can make the motions, you can play all the rudiments. And the ones you thought were previously really hard are suddenly just as simple as playing single strokes. These motions will give you a form of control that I don't see from that rudimental world. Okay? So, you go through the 4 16th note exercises. I recommend you make sure you have that metronome going, and you're a drummer, I would assume, so you want your feet to have coordination too as you do these things. Use your feet when you practice. Don't just sit there working on your hands without your feet going. Now, if you look at the chart of 16th notes, the accent is moving around to 4 different points in that group of 4 notes. So I'm just keeping the 16ths going with no accent. Now I'm going to move the accent to the 2nd position after the accent. Okay, now the left hand has to practice going up and down. And you're also practicing your timing, putting your foot on an on-accented note. Now you go on. So take the accent out, and now it's on the and in the middle of the 4 notes. On and up. Okay? Make sure you're using your feet. That's what differentiates these 4 exercises. Otherwise, you're just going up and down, and they could be anywhere in time. So you go back to on-accented notes and then figure out how to get to the other one. Now you've done all 4 of those exercises. Now if you notice on the sheet, the 16ths are before the triplets. But we're all taught to learn to go 1 and 2 and 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2 and the triplets are always slower than 16th. So why did Murray put him 2nd? It's a simple. The difference is, when you do 16ths, you're working on one hand's motion up and down at a time. Your mind is gaining control of these motions. As you gain control, the next step is to challenge you. Oh, now you got to pay attention to both hands, shifting the accent from side to side. And if you add your feet, now 1 and a 2 and a, you got to move the accent around. Monitor your feet, monitor both hands. So the next step is just a little harder than the step before, and that is what happens through the whole gamut of the rudiments. Each step is a little bit harder than the one before. So now you're able to monitor both hands going back and forth. You go back to the flam page, and you'll notice it says feint and flam. Well, now you've got to go back and forth and monitor both hands. That's the purpose of doing those triplets first. Now you can monitor both hands and get onto this idea. Okay, you make an upstroke into a flam, upstroke into a flam. That's what a feint is. A feint is a word that means an upstroke. Murray called it an upstroke. In some old drum books, there was the word feint, and it was what an upstroke was. But those books are out of print, and those concepts have disappeared. Except for people that study with Murray. We know all about them. Okay, next rudiment is a little harder than the one before. And you notice the words are reversed now. Now it says flam and feint. That means the upstroke is on that last 16th note in the grouping there. And it has to go up and down faster, because now it's a 16th note into the flam rather than 1 and where it was an 8th note. Okay, so Again, the next step is a little harder than the one before. 1 E and a 2 E and, up and down, quick, up and down, a little flicking motion. Flam and faint. Now, after that comes the flam and stroke. And again, the next step's a little harder. What are you learning in this rudiment? Well, if you look at it, it goes right to left and left to right. But if you look at the and is the accented note. And physically, when you start playing this rudiment, once you can keep track of it alternating, it actually starts to feel like it's starting on the and with the accent, because you feel your right hand go and 1. It makes an accent and then another throw, but not as forceful as the accent, because you want to differentiate between the accent and the flam. Accent has to be louder than the flam. That's what an accent is there for. Accent, right? Flam, and then an upstroke. So, anyway, that rudiment is for figuring out how to make 2 different throws that have different force levels. So every throw isn't always an accent. It can be also bounces, and we'll get to that later. But first you got to learn how to make 2 throws of different velocities. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and. Make sense? Flam and stroke. Now you get on to the very last one there that says ta-tlum. That is not recognized as a rudiment. Murray didn't really call it a rudiment. He just used the word ta-tlum to describe what it sounded like when you played it. And its purpose was to teach you how to bounce into a flam so that a grace note would be the end of a rebound. Ta-tlum is what he called that. Ta-tlum, 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 ta-tlum. But he wanted you to know how to bounce into a flam stroke. Okay? That covers all the sheets and the information that Murray shows me in my first lesson. He went over all that information pretty quick. So we've gotten to the end of the information that Murray Spivack taught me at the first lesson. Now remember that his process takes about a year to go through all the rudiments, and this is just the first step that I've shown you. So if you're curious about learning more about these methods, you can get my book from the Apple bookstore, put in my name as author, and the books I've published will show up. You can also study privately with me, either in person here in Los Angeles or over Zoom or Skype, whichever you prefer. I'm very reasonably priced. Anyway, I hope you found this video useful. Hope the information helps you.